Hello and welcome to the Futures Lab. So, this week we're going to be making weapons and projectiles. So let's have a quick look at our plan. Let's update some of the things we've done. Now, with the shooting, I'm actually going to break this into two parts. First we have the weapon, the thing that does the shooting, and then we have the projectile, the thing that is shot out of the weapon. So let's think about what these things need to do. So the weapon, it needs to move, follow the player. And it also needs to point in the same direction as the player. Then it needs to do the shooting part, which technically is to create the bullet or the projectile. Which brings us to our second part, the projectile. So what does the projectile need to do? Well, it needs to move away from the weapon. It needs to be able to hit the walls and stop. And it also needs to be able to hit the enemies and deal damage. Okay, so we've got our plan for today. We're going to make our weapon sprite and our projectile sprite. Now, I'm going to start off with the projectile, and then we're going to do the weapon after. So hover over here in your Scratch project, move up until it says paint, and the projectile, we're just going to do a really nice, simple little box. I'm going to make mine yellow, and I'm going to make the outline black, and I'm going to make the outline 4. Now, I'm also going to zoom in a bunch because I don't want this projectile to be very big. The size of about 20 by 10 pixels is a good size. And then once you're finished shrinking your projectile, just make sure to use this tool to drag it into the middle. And of course, it's always important to name your sprites. So we're going to name this projectile. Now, we could call it bullet, but if we wanted to have different types of projectiles, like maybe rockets or grenades or arrows or ninja stars, I like the term projectile, and then we can have multiple costumes for the different types of projectiles. Speaking of which, let's also name this costume. I'm going to name this bullet. Now let's draw something a little bit more involved. Move here and then click on paint here, and we're going to paint our very first weapon. I'm going to use first the rectangle sprite. I'm going to use a brown. Then I'm going to do a little rectangle just here, and then I'm going to use this tool here. This tool allows me to take these little dots at the corners of the square and just turn it into a little shape like this. Then I'm going to make another rectangle, and this one is going to be grey. So I'm going to select a nice grey color. I'm also going to use what's called a gradient. So you've got 3 of them here. This one is no gradient. Then the left-right gradient is one color on one side and the other color on the other side. There's an up-down gradient and an inside-outside gradient. I'm going to select the up-down gradient, and one color I'm going to make a dark gray, and the other color I'm going to make a light gray. And if you want, you can even swap them so that the dark and light change whether they're up or down. And then I'm going to make a nice little rectangle like this, and it looks like metal, which is pretty cool. Then finally, I'm going to get this circle. I'm going to click on no gradient. And I'm just going to get a purple. This can be any color you want. I just want 2 little circular hands, like one here and one here, just to look like something is holding the gun. And so now what I'll do is I'll just shrink this down a little bit, and I'll move it so that the 2 hands are on either side of the center. Of course, always remember to name your sprite. So let's call this weapon. Again, you could call it gun if you wanted, but then what do you do if you want your weapon to be a rocket launcher or a sword or something like that? So calling it weapon's a bit more general, but I will name the costume. I'm going to call this one basic gun, because this is going to be the kind of very standard gun that you start with. And once we're done with our drawing, it's time to get into the code. So click on the code tab right here. And let's start off by making this weapon follow the player around, shall we? Let's go to Events, get out when green flag clicked. Then we're going to go to Control, get out a forever, put that underneath the when green flag clicked. Go to Motion and look for go to random position. Drag that out. Just for fun, hit go and see what happens, and the gun goes everywhere. And then click on where it says random position and change that to player. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now the gun should be following the player around. There's even a bit of a funny delay, which I actually quite like the look of. Now the next thing we need to do is make sure that when we're turning, the gun faces the direction that we're going. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on My Blocks, we're going to click on Make a Block, and we're going to call this Move. And then this is where all of the movement code for our weapon is going to go. Move our define move over there. We'll move our go to player underneath our move block. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we're actually running our move block inside the forever loop. Let's go to control. Let's get out an if then, and let's go to sensing. We're going to put in a control, just like we did with the player movement, the if key pressed, then do something. So you should already have either the left arrow and right arrow, or maybe A and D tied to the left movement and right movement of your player. So use the same control scheme here. So get out a key space pressed. But we want to change this to, let's start off with the left arrow, shall we? Then we're going to go to motion, and we're going to get out a point in direction 90. Drag that and put it into the gap. Now, if you click on this 90, you'll find a little wheel comes up, and you can drag this arrow all the way around into whatever direction you want. So we're going to drag it so it's pointing towards the left, and then let's copy this whole thing, right click and duplicate. Put this on the bottom. If key right arrow pressed, we're going to point in the right direction. Okay, let's see what that looks like. My gun is turning right and left, but it's also going upside down. And that's because the kind of rotation the gun is doing is kind of like this. Can you see it's sort of turning all the way around, which means it's upside down when it's pointing towards the left. There is a fix for this though. If we go to motion and look for set rotation style to left and right, if we put this just underneath when green flag clicked, and then we press the start button, now when we rotate the gun, it will only face either entirely left or entirely right, just like this. So now when you move your character around, the gun should just flip left and right. Now, my gun's a little bit too high. It looks a little bit weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into the weapon, and I'm actually going to drag the whole thing just down a little bit. You can also readjust your weapon. If you drag it a bit further away from the center, then it will be a little bit further forwards on your player model. Just make sure that when you start playing your game, you go back to your code tab. Otherwise, when you press your arrow keys, you're going to move around all of this stuff in the drawing mode. So now, yep, that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, as an experiment, try moving your character towards the left and then hit stop and go, and you'll notice the character's now starting off kind of facing towards the wall, which is a bit weird, and that's because we haven't created a starting direction for the weapon. So we can do that very easily now. We just need to put something right underneath when green flag clicked, which is the start of the game. So if we get out a point in direction 90, put that right underneath when green flag clicked, and yep, that's actually the direction we want it to be. Now when we hit go, the gun is facing towards the right, which is what I want for my game. Now we need to get the gun to create the bullets or the projectiles. And in order to do that, first I'm going to explain to you a little something about clones. First, here's a little quick challenge for you. How many Space Invaders can you count? Pause the video and then I'll give you the answer. Okay, so I would say 5 down here, 11 across the top. That means that we've got 5 times 11, so that's 55. But wait, this one has been shot, so -1, so that's to 54. But maybe this is a Space Invader as well, in which case back up to 55. So I would say 55. Let's assume there's 55 Space Invaders. Now just imagine having to make a different sprite for each of those 55 Space Invaders. Wouldn't that be really annoying? And then just imagine you wanted to change the code inside the Space Invaders, so you had to change it in every single individual Space Invader sprite. That would be so boring, and it would be very easy to make a mistake. But now, watch very carefully. Look at this Scratch project. How many Space Invaders do you see? Well, I think it's 4 times 10, so that's 40. But how many sprites do we have? We've only got the 1. Well, we are doing this via clones. Have a think about this. Look at all these Mario Kart races. Do they have things in common, and do they have things that are different about them? Have a think, write your answer in the comments. Okay, did you get your answer in? So here are some things that the karts all have in common. They all have 4 wheels. They all have an engine, probably. They all have a steering wheel. They all have a person who's driving them. They've got 2 of these things coming out the back, maybe the exhaust pipes. They're all different colors, though, and they're all driven by different people. And if we were to look at these Mario Karts, even though it's the same Mario in each of them, they're all different karts. Maybe some of them are faster than others. Maybe some of them have better handling or turning than the others. Maybe the different types of karts have different strengths and weaknesses. Clones are a good way of understanding something called object-oriented programming. If you have something like a class, which is the idea of a car, you can then have code called a constructor that makes lots of versions of that car. And maybe a bunch of things about them are the same, like the fact they've got wheels and engines and can drive, but maybe other things are different, like maybe different players are in control of different cars, and the different cars are different colors. We're going to do something very similar with our attack. We have our class. This is what we tell the clones how to behave when we create them. We're going to have our constructor, which is going to make clones of our class, our pattern. And then we're going to have individual different objects, clones of the bullets. So now with all of that in mind, we are going to make a shoot my block. So go to My Blocks and click on Make a Block. We're going to call this shoot. Then we're going to click on OK. We're going to move our define shoot right under here. And of course, we need to make sure that we're actually using our shoot my block, our shoot function, by putting it into the forever loop. So we need to decide what's the button we want to press in order to start shooting. So if we go to Control, get out an if then, and then go to sensing and get out a key space pressed. And then we're going to go to Control, look down until we find create clone of myself. But we don't want to create clones of the weapon. We want to create clones of the projectile. So make that change there. Then give it a test. Move your character around and hold down the spacebar, and nothing really feels like it's happening, does it? But if you drag a bunch of the projectiles around, you'll realize there are a bunch of clones of this projectile, but they're just all sitting on top of the original, so they're not moving. We're going to fix that. Make sure you're in the projectile sprite, then go to Control and look for When I Start as Clone. These are the instructions that each of these projectiles, each of these bullets, are going to follow when they start life as a brand new clone. So the first thing we want to make sure that they actually come out of the player. So we're going to go to Motion and get out a Go to Random position, just like we did with the weapon. Give that a bit of a test, and you'll notice that all of the clones are now just going somewhere random. But we don't want that. So click on Random and change it to Player, hit Go, and then have a bit of a walk around, and now you can leave behind a little trail of bullets everywhere you go. The next step, of course, is we want these bullets to actually start moving once we've shot them. So we're going to go to Control, and we're going to get out something called Repeat Until. Put that right there. We want the bullets to keep moving until they touch one of these walls, one of these platforms. So we're going to go to Sensing and get out Touching Mouse Pointer, but change that mouse pointer to Platforms, or whatever you've called your platform sprite. Now, what's the thing we want them to repeat? We want them to move forwards. So we're going to go to Motion and get out Move 10 steps. Now, move is a little bit different to what we've done before with changing X and changing Y. Move is to do with the direction that a sprite is facing. So if a sprite is facing directly up and we tell it to move 10, it will move 10 up. Whatever direction that the sprite is facing is the direction that it will move. As a fun little experiment, change the direction of your projectile, and that will change the direction that your projectile comes out of your player. Let's give that a bit of a test and see what happens, shall we? Right, so now, oh, there we go. Now I'm firing these projectiles all going kind of diagonally up and left. But if I change that direction to like this, now they're all going in that direction. And you'll notice that what they're doing is they're just stopping, which looks kind of cool, but we're going to run into a problem soon. And I'll show you what I mean. If we just keep making more and more of these projectiles, eventually it will stop making new ones. Doesn't matter how many times I press space, it's not making any more projectiles. And that's because Scratch has a limit of how many clones it lets you have on the screen at once. And I think the number is about 300. So what we need to make sure is when we no longer need our clones, we have to delete our clones. In order to do that, we're going to go to Control and look for Delete This Clone. And just put that onto the bottom here so that now when the projectiles finally reach one of these platforms, instead of just getting stuck on it, it will delete itself. Another thing you've probably already noticed is that when you press the stop button or the start button, it deletes all of the clones in your previous game. So now let's give that a test. Okay, yeah, that's looking fine. Now I actually want there to be a slight delay from when the projectiles delete themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to Control, get out a wait 1 second, put that before the delete this clone, but I'm going to change this to 0 seconds. And that's just going to mean that you're going to see just for a split second the bullet embed in the wall before it deletes itself. That's also going to be useful later when we need to make sure that the projectiles are touching the enemies and the enemies realize they've been hit by a bullet before the bullet deletes itself. Now, you've probably noticed by now we've got a problem. Doesn't matter which direction your weapon is facing, the projectiles always come out of one side of the player. So we need to be able to change the direction that the projectiles are facing. So in order to do that, we're going to go to Motion, and we're going to get out a point in direction 90 block. We're going to put that right here, just after the clone is created. But now what we need is some way of the projectiles figuring out which direction should they be facing. They actually need to retrieve this information from a different sprite, the weapon sprite. If the weapon sprite is facing a direction, the projectile needs to face the same direction. But how do we do that? Well, if you click on Sensing, the light blue category, and then get out Backdrop of Stage, then specifically click on Stage and change it to Weapon, now we have a bunch of information from the weapon. And this is a way of us retrieving information from one sprite for the benefit of a different sprite. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the direction of the weapon, and we're going to put this whole thing over the 90 so that this projectile will point in whatever direction the weapon is pointing. Let's give that a try. If we give that a bit of a test, we should be able to shoot to the right and then shoot to the left. Excellent, very good. Now at this point, if you want, you can change the speed of your projectiles. I'm going to make mine a bit more speedy. I like 25. I've had a bit of an experiment, and that's just a good speed for me, but you can decide to have whatever speed you like. Now, some of you have probably noticed we've still got this random projectile just floating somewhere on the screen. This is actually the very original projectile, and this is where all of the clones come from. So we need it to be there, but we don't want to be able to see it. Thankfully, Scratch has a nice, easy way of sorting this. We just need to make sure that we go to Events, get out a When Green Flag Clicked, go to Looks, and get out a Hide block. But if you hit Go now, the original will disappear, but all of the clones will also be invisible, which is really annoying. We need the clones to be visible. Thankfully, there's an equally easy way to sort this. If we get out a Show block and put it underneath When I Start as Clone. That way the original will hide itself at the beginning of the game, but when each clone is first created, it will show itself. Let's give that a test. There we go. Now there's one more thing we need to fix. Currently, we're shooting this very rapid stream of projectiles, which is kind of cool, but we don't want all of our weapons to always be that rapidly fired. We want to have control over the gap in between each projectile as we're firing them. So in order to do that, we're going to go to our weapons sprite, and we're going to put some more code underneath our define shoot my block. We are going to create a countdown. If you can imagine you're about to run a race and there's a countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. You're not allowed to start running until the countdown reaches all the way down to 0. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're actually going to use an if, then, else block in order to be able to do this. So go to Control and get out this if, then, else, and put this specifically with the if-then right underneath define shoot. Now we've used these before, but as a reminder, there are two possible outcomes from an if-then else statement. So first it asks the question, and if the answer to the question is yes, then it does the first outcome. And if the answer is no, then it does the second outcome. So the question that we're going to ask is, has the countdown reached 0? So in order to have a countdown, we are going to make a variable. And again, as a reminder, a variable is a magical box that contains one thing that changes. We're going to make a variable called weapon recharge, and this is going to be our countdown. So click on make a variable, and then type in weapon recharge, and then we're going to click on OK. You should now have your weapon recharge variable here, and it's starting off at 0. So now we're going to go to operators, and we're going to get out a less than operator. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the top. And you'll notice it's a little 6-sided shape that fits nicely into the 6-sided hole. We're going to go to variables, and we're going to get out weapon recharge and put it into that first little gap before the arrow. And then we're going to click on that 50, and we're going to replace that with 1, because what's less than 1? It's 0. So when the weapon recharge gets less than 1, when it hits 0, then we're allowed to shoot. But until then, we're not allowed to shoot. Now, in order for this to work, this also means when we do shoot, we need to reset the countdown, reset the recharge. So we're going to get out a set my variable and put that right underneath create clone of projectile. We're going to change my variable into weapon recharge, and we can decide how long we want the countdown to be. I'm going to choose 10. Let's give this a test, and we'll find that we should only be able to fire 1 bullet. Currently, we've got weapon recharge is 0, and if we hit go, and if we fire, the weapon recharge goes up to 10, but it's not counting down. So that's what we're going to put into the else. We're going to get out a change my variable by 1, and we're going to change the weapon recharge by -1. And now you'll notice that this number is counting down pretty quick. And so now you should be able to fire, and there'll be a nice gap between your different bullets, and you can see that this countdown is happening really quick. It's going all the way from 10 all the way to 0, really, really fast. So have a bit of an experiment. Feel free to change this number to whatever you like. Later on, we're going to be making different weapons, and those different weapons will have different recharges because they're going to have different strength and different weaknesses. That's all we have time for this time. Subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see the next episode. Let me know in the comments what you would like me to do next, or if you need help. I can't answer the comments like I used to, but if you are an experienced coder, see if you can leave a comment helping people who are asking questions. Aside from that, stay awesome, be cool, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time, ninjas.